Okay, let's dive in. We've got some really quite powerful source material today. It details a case. Well, it's about communal violence, mob justice, really, that led to a, frankly, shocking triple murder in Comilla, Bangladesh.
Yeah, this is a deep dive into what happens when local rule of law just completely collapses. Our sources show us, in pretty stark detail, how something that seems almost minor, a stolen mobile phone, could spiral within just 48 hours into this absolute horror.
And that's exactly what we want to trace today, right? That path of escalation. We're looking at the facts of this triple murder, July 3rd, 2025, in Karabari village, Muradnagar, Upazila. And it was targeted, specifically aimed at one family.
That's right. The victims were Roxana Akhtarubi, her son Russell Mia, and her daughter Tasfia Akhtar Joniki. And tragically, it didn't stop there. Two other daughters, Ruma and Rikta, survived, but were severely injured.
It's just devastating.
It is. And what makes this case so important for understanding, societal breakdown is how the sources reveal this kind of slow decay. Almost predictable, really. The mechanisms meant to keep peace just failed.
So we have to start right at the beginning then. How does a stolen phone end up putting people on a hit list? Because the sources are really clear, aren't they? The Ruby family, they weren't accused of the theft.
No, not at all.
They became targets because of their protests. That single choice.
Exactly. The actual conflict kicked off 2 days earlier. There was a stolen phone. And some villagers, well, they decided on their own justice. They found an auto rickshaw driver they suspected and beat him quite severely. That was the initial vigilantism.
Right, and this is the critical moment. Roxana Akhtarubi's family stepped in. They actually intervened.
Yeah, with incredible courage, really.
They protested the beating of this driver. They were standing up against what they saw as just, wrong, and unjust punishment outside any legal process.
And that single act, that intervention, it completely flipped the script. The original attackers, the vigilantes, suddenly saw themselves as maybe being challenged, and the Ruby family became the problem. The sources show the tension didn't just, rise, generally focused like a laser right on the Ruby family. They were seen as interfering with community justice.
Interfering, wow.
Yeah, they went from just being neighbors to being seen as adversaries.
Yeah.
All because they stood up for someone else's basic rights.
It's a really tragic example of how quickly you can become isolated when you stand on principle, especially when things are already tense. But okay, so the tension is there, focused on the family. Was there any attempt to fix it, to de-escalate?
There was, and this is the next critical point, or maybe the critical failure point, the breakdown of justice.
Ah, right.
Because these communities, they do have traditional ways to resolve conflict, and they tried one. On the night of July 2nd, so the night right before the attack, they held an arbitration meeting. It's known locally as a Salish Boithok.
Okay, a Salish Boithok. For listeners who might not be familiar, what kind of weight does a Salish actually carry? Because we read that its failure was the direct prelude to the catastrophe. What does it really represent, authority-wise?
That's a really important point. A Salish isn't just, a casual chat. Historically, especially in rural areas where formal courts can be slow or hard to access or maybe even distrusted, the Salish is like the last line of community governance. It's kind of an informal court. You have local elders, influential figures. They preside. And usually, its decision is respected. It's meant to restore harmony.
So if the Salish fails, it's not just that they couldn't agree. It's like the community itself is saying, our own system for peace doesn't work anymore.
Precisely. And the sources are absolutely clear on this. The meeting was a complete failure, no resolution. Everyone left angry, polarized. It left this vacuum.
And that failure wasn't just a dead end. It sounds like it was almost a green light.
In a way, yes. It signaled that the traditional authority was powerless. So for the angry faction, it didn't just leave a void. It kind of validated the idea of taking matters into their own hands. It pushed things directly towards violence.
When that door, the civilized one, closes, the other one just bursts open. And the sources describe what happened just hours later, the attack itself, morning of July 3rd. It's grim reading.
The scale is just staggering. That's what makes it such a terrifying example of mob mentality. We're not talking about a few angry people losing control. The documents mention nearly 100 people.
100?
Yeah, shatadiklok is the phrase used, descending on Ruby's house at dawn. That suggests, well, at the very least, mass participation almost instantly, maybe even some organization.
And the attack itself. The sources describe it brutally. They say the family was trapped inside, couldn't get out.
That's right. Roxana Ruby, the mother who made that initial protest, she was killed first. Then her son, Russell Mia, and daughter, Pasfia Akhtar Janaki, beaten to death by the crowd.
Just horrific.
And the aftermath described in the sources is just as chilling. Once it was over, the village fell silent, gripped by terror. The phrase used, "atankatama mirjay," it means like paralyzed by fear.
Understandable.
When a mob that size commits murder, the message to everyone else is brutally clear. Don't step out of line, there's no protection if you do.
And that idea that the mob's justice replaced any legal authority, that seems to be the core takeaway here, isn't it? This isn't just a crime, it's a real-world example of what the authorities themselves called Jantar Bishar, people's justice.
Exactly. It shows what happens when people feel they have the right to enforce justice themselves. The violence is immediate, it's overwhelming, and often it targets those who dared to challenge the group, regardless of what the original issue even was. It shifts from a local dispute to a complete system failure.
Which brings us to the formal legal response. Because despite that terror you mentioned, a case was filed 2 days later, July 5th.
Yes, filed by Ruma Akhtar, one of the surviving daughters. And the sheer number of accused people is, well, it's huge. She's specifically named 38 people.
38 named individuals.
Plus an additional 20 to 25 unnamed or unknown people. So potentially over 60 individuals implicated in these murders.
And the official label from the authorities is important context too, right? You mentioned the police, RAB, that's the Rapid Action Battalion, the elite unit, they called it mob lynching, Jantar Bishar.
Right. Using that official term is a very serious acknowledgement. It's the state recognizing its own monopoly on force broke down. They're confirming this wasn't random. It was a mass execution disguised as vigilante justice.
So who actually got arrested in the initial sweep? The sources say at least 8 people initially, but there's a crucial detail about who they were.
Yes, this is where it connects to wider structural issues. Among those arrested were local Union Parashad members and several other, quote, influential individuals.
Okay, let's break that down. A Union Parashad member, what exactly is that role? And why is their alleged involvement so significant?
A Union Parashad member is basically a locally elected official. They're the grassroots level of government in rural Bangladesh. The first point of contact between the community and the state, really.
Right.
So when these elected figures, the ones who are supposed to be upholding order, are arrested for allegedly participating in a vigilante triple murder, well, it completely shatters public trust in the whole local system.
So their involvement suggests this wasn't just some spontaneous rage. It hints that this extra-legal justice might have had support, maybe even organization, from people within the local power structure.
That's the deeply disturbing implication, yes. When the people meant to mediate are leading the mob, the whole system is compromised. It becomes a political issue, not just a criminal one.
Makes sense.
The sources do confirm these suspects, including the influential ones, were put on remand for 3 days, and the case was escalated. It was transferred to the Comilla District DB Police, the detective branch. That suggests the authorities recognize the seriousness and maybe the complexity involved.
Okay, so if we pull back and look at the bigger picture, the societal impact, this isn't just an isolated incident that's now being handled by the police. It left a mark on the community itself.
Absolutely. The sources are very clear about the ongoing atmosphere in Karabari village. It's described as widespread panic. The fact that many residents actually fled the area.
They left their homes.
Yes, completely left out of fear. That tells you everything about the lack of perceived safety, even after arrests were made. The trust is gone.
That panic, that's the lasting scar, isn't it? When the law fails so spectacularly and judgment is seized violently like this, the human element, just the basic right to feel safe, the right to speak out against injustice, that's the real victim. This family paid the highest price imaginable simply for trying to do the right thing.
And if we just quickly summarize that escalation path again, it starts with a minor theft. That leads to a vigilante beating. Roxana Ruby's family protests that injustice. Their protest then becomes the focus, leading to the failure of the community's own justice system, the Salish. And that failure, possibly enabled or even led by local figures of influence, opens the door for mass vigilante violence, the murders, and then the community's subsequent collapse into fear. It's a devastating chain reaction.
It really is. A chilling sequence of events laid out so clearly in the source material. Thank you for walking us through not just the events, but the systemic failures that allowed them to happen.
Of course. But before we finish, there's one last thought, really a question, that arises directly from these sources, especially concerning those arrests of local leaders. Something for you, the listener, to really consider. If these local governance figures, these Union Parashad members, are ultimately found guilty of participating in or even leading this kind of vigilante murder.
Mhm.
What does that do, long-term, to people's faith in democratic institutions at the local level? How willing will people be to trust the state, or even the idea of state-provided justice, when its own representatives are implicated in mob rule?
That's a deeply unsettling question about the very foundations of order and trust, something to definitely mull over. Thank you again.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep seeking knowledge and keep looking beneath the surface.